Dave Talks Comics, Episode 120, Teen Titans Season 1, Part 1. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, the program where I talk about comic books, cartoons, and comic book conventions. Most episodes are a mix of summary and opinion and include spoilers. Please keep that in mind. Spoilers. All past episodes can be streamed or downloaded from the program's website, davetalkscomics.com. In addition to the program's website, this podcast can also be found on iTunes, Stitcher, and Facebook. On this episode, I will be talking about the first season of the Teen Titans cartoon, which debuted in 2003 and was produced by Glenn Murakami, Linda Steiner, and Bruce Timm. The show ran for 65 episodes, which were evenly spread across 5 seasons. The first season originally aired from July 2003 to February 2004. I saw many of the episodes from the first couple seasons when they first aired on Cartoon Network. The series as a whole, and some of the episodes and storylines in particular, were inspired by the new Teen Titans stories of the early to mid-1980s, which were mostly written and drawn by Marv Wolfman, George Perez, and Romeo Tanghal. The cartoon is much more humorous than the comic books, but has a serious side to it as it delves into the relationships of the Titans to one another and to some of the villains they fight. In the cartoon, the team consists of Robin, Starfire, Cyborg, Raven, and Beast Boy, and the Titans do not have secret or civilian identities in the cartoon. Sisters is the second episode of the first season of the Teen Titans cartoon. This is an episode which focuses for the most part on Starfire, although all 5 members of the team are in it. It's basically broken into 3 acts the way I see it. The first act is where the Teen Titans are hanging out at an amusement park on the boardwalk, on a pier somewhere. I guess this is New York City because I think that's where they're supposed to be located. And some alien machines come flying out, one alien machine comes flying out of the sky and tries to abduct Starfire. Well, the team manages to defeat this alien machine, which kind of looks like it's later called a probe in the episode, and it kind of looks like an octopus a bit, except for it only has 4 limbs instead of 8. But it's got that same sort of form to it. It's got a head, kind of, a main section, and then these 4 tentacle or arm-like things. So the team returns to the tower, only to encounter Starfire's sister, Blackfire. Now, this is, of course, only the second episode of the series, and we really haven't been given anything up to this point, I don't think, about Starfire's background. But here her sister is introduced, Blackfire, and it's her older sister, and very quickly she moves in and makes Starfire very uncomfortable because she quickly charms the other members of the team. So it's pretty obvious that she's trying to push Starfire aside, and Starfire, who is somebody who, in this cartoon, in this version of the Teen Titans, is very bubbly and very excited usually and very happy and upbeat, quickly becomes very sad because she can see her sister is taking her place. And later in the episode, her sister actually borrows her clothes and is dressed just like her. She even puts on some hair that makes her look more like her because Blackfire's hair is very dark. I'm not sure it's supposed to be a navy color or black, but so Blackfire moves in. She manages to charm everybody. She even charms Raven, who was, usually very dour and not very excitable, but somehow she manages to find everybody's weakness, I guess you could say, or everybody's interests, and claim to have a similar interest, or at least impresses them enough. But this doesn't last too long. Basically, she gets the whole team to go out to a nightclub, and while they're at the nightclub, more of these probes show up. And they attack the Teen Titans, once again trying to capture Starfire. And they managed to defeat the probes, but then the intergalactic police, who were the ones who sent the probes, show up. and they capture Starfire. But the team once again jumps in and intercedes, and Robin is able to put a couple clues together and figures out that Blackfire is the one that the Galactic Police are after, not Starfire. And so, basically then Starfire has a showdown with her sister, and Starfire defeats her, and it's not said, but, you kind of get the idea that this is the first time she's ever stood up to her sister or something along those lines. The Galactic Police haul away Blackfire, which is basically where the episode ends, with Starfire being very happy that she's once again accepted within the team, because at one point they had even extended membership in the team to Blackfire, which made Starfire feel even more sad. And she was even thinking about leaving the team, because before the Intergalactic Police show up, she was getting ready to leave. She was getting ready to fly off of the top of the Titan's tower when Robin comes out and says, "You weren't even going to say goodbye?" And that's when the Intergalactic Police show up, and that whole part of the Act 3 of the episode unrolls from that point. I really like this episode. I like this. There's a lot of good humor. There's a lot of good humor in a lot of these episodes, but there's a lot of good humor in this episode. And there's also a lot of touching, moving character moments, especially for Starfire in this episode, where you see two sides of her. You see her initially being very happy, and then you see how she can be brought down. And it makes her, I think, much more three-dimensional than she otherwise might seem. The other thing that I think is interesting about this episode is the inclusion of a character of Blackfire in this episode, who I had first encountered in what was her first story that she showed up in New Teen Titans, the 1980 series New Teen Titans. She is, of course, Starfire's sister in that series. And it's a story which I had bought, and I may have mentioned this once before on Dave Talks Comics. It's a story which I actually bought the final part of the story off the racks back in 1982, I believe it is. The final part of the story was in New Teen Titans Annual Number 1. I don't believe the story has a title. It has been reprinted. It is available in the New Teen Titans archives, which you can get digitally or in hard in paperback form. It is a story where the New Teen Titans team up with the Omega Men. It precedes, I think, by about a year, the appearance of the Omega Men comic book, the first Omega Men series. And I thought it was a really cool story. I mean, just the final part of it was really cool, and I really enjoyed that. And it wasn't until several years, well, more than several, like a couple decades later, about 5 years ago, 5 years ago, something like that, that I actually searched out and found the other parts of the story and read the story as a whole. And it is a very cool story, and it can be found in New Teen Titans numbers 23, 24, wait a minute, let me make sure I'm getting this right. It can be found in New Teen Titans 23, 24, 25, and Annual Number 1 is the final story in the issue. And of course, it's written by Marv Wolfman and drawn by George Perez. Actually, now that I'm looking at it on the screen here, George Perez is actually credited as a co-writer on this story, or at least on the first part of this story. Let me click through here and see. Well, not on the second part. Maybe he was credited as a co-plotter. Well, on the third part of the story, he is. Interesting. Very, very interesting. But this is certainly available in electronic format, and I'm not sure how much the individual issues would cost you, but I think it's an excellent story, and I really enjoyed this episode of Teen Titans, and it's one of my favorites from the first season. Before I move on, I wanted to say just one more thing about this episode of the second episode, Sisters, of the Teen Titans cartoon, and that is that Blackfire, I wanted to say something about her appearance, that the first story that she appears in comic books, and that is that she's she comes to Earth with murder in her eyes. She wants to kill her sister. She has allied herself with the Gordanians. It is a very different story from this. I mean, this is much more lighthearted, and while there's some evil, there is some malice in her in this episode. I mean, it's nothing compared to what it's like in the comic book. So if you want something a little more intense, a little more serious, then you might want to check out that story from New Teen Titans 23 to 25 plus annual number 1. And one thing that you do have in this episode is that there are a couple things, well, there's at least one thing that is mentioned that comes from that story, and that is the Gordanians. I'm not sure if that's the first appearance of the Gordanians in that story. I'm not sure if it is the first appearance of the Gordanians, because I haven't read all of the New Teen Titans. It's one of those things that's on my bucket list, my list of things that I want to read. The other thing I wanted to say about this show and about this episode, and I'll probably repeat this in the future, is that there are there are some big leaps that are made, where they really don't explain everything. And sometimes I'm in a nitpicky kind of mood, and I will notice these things and I'll make a note about it. But honestly, it usually isn't too big. It's usually it's something that I'm willing to accept. And then finally, I wanted to say something. There's a mini doc, a 21-minute documentary about the making of this show, and it includes interviews with Glenn Murakami, who was I believe the show runner would probably be the best way to describe it, or the show's producer. And it also has Marv Wolfman and George Perez. And I think it's a great piece. And you can see it for free. You don't have to buy the set. You can see it for free on Amazon. It's, like I said, it's 21 minutes long. They do a little bit of compare and contrast, especially Perez and Wolfman, comparing and contrasting their work on the comic book, excuse me, their work on the comic book to the cartoon. And I believe Wolfman and possibly Perez as well also did some writing for the cartoon. But it's a really good piece, and it's really what convinced me to finally, because it's something I've been thinking about watching, because I saw a lot of these episodes when they first aired. But this is what kind of pushed me over the edge and convinced me that I should get this season. And they go into some of the things like the animation, and I mean they do things with the animation which are very different from what was done in Justice League and JLU and Young Justice. They do some very humorous things that you don't see on those shows, which I like, but I know are not to everybody's taste. But I think the feature, maybe featurette would be the best way to describe it, is worth checking out because it gives you an idea of what to expect without actually investing money in the show, and gives you a taste for what the show is like. The 5th episode in Season 1 is called The Sum of His Parts, and this is a very cyborg-centric episode, although once again, all of the Titans are in this episode. All of them have speaking parts in this episode, but it's really Cyborg who gets the spotlight in this one. What happens early in the episode is that Cyborg experiences battery failure while they're at a park, and before he can get the problem fixed, his battery goes completely dead and he falls into a hole. He's found by a creature called Fixit, which at first glance seems to be a machine, but is later revealed to be partly human. What Fixit does is he recharges Cyborg's battery, but then he wants Cyborg to stick around so he can do some more work on Cyborg. And he convinces Cyborg that there's problems with him, that he's still broken. And what ultimately is revealed is that what he wants to do is he wants to replace Cyborg's human parts with machine parts. Those are the imperfections. Those are the problems that he sees in Cyborg. Eventually the other Titans show up to rescue Cyborg, but before they get there, Fixit is all ready to do these repairs on Cyborg. And it isn't until he tries to download Cyborg's memories, so he starts to download Cyborg's memories, that he sees all the things that Cyborg has been experiencing, and he realizes what he's missing. Now, it isn't really clear who Fixit is, and I'd have no idea who this Fixit character is supposed to be. If he's a counterpart of somebody from comic books, the limited research I did, and from my memory, there is no, I don't think this is a story that was taken from the comic books, or not to my knowledge, at least. But he's an interesting character because he definitely seems as if he's somebody who used to be human and then started changing his body. Maybe due to accidents he had to replace part of his body and become partly machine. And then he just started to do more. I'm just speculating here as far as how this goes. But he's an interesting character. And there's the whole Fixit part of the story, and there's a whole part of this episode that I have not mentioned at all, and it's because I really don't like it. The part that I like is the Fixit Cyborg story. The part that I don't like is there's this magician named Mumbo, who I think may have shown up in at least one other episode, who there was obvious attempts at humor in there, but they just did not connect with me. And I just was completely bored by that. What I found interesting was the Cyborg Fixit storyline. So the episode as a whole is a bit of a mixed bag. And I love how Fixit keeps using this statement, repairs must be complete before, or something like, repairs must be complete before you can leave. And at first Cyborg says, no, I'm going. And then he gets convinced that Fixit is right, that he needs some repairs. But that's before he knows what Fixit wants to do to him. And then he tries to leave. He says, no, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm getting out of here. And then Fixit, uses force. He's got all these machines because what I didn't mention before is that this whole thing takes place. Well, I did mention that Cyborg fell into a hole, and this whole thing with Fixit lives underground, and he's taken all these machines, all these machine parts, and built all these machines or repaired machines that have been thrown out, and so he uses them to capture Cyborg. They're the ones who brought Cyborg to Fixit, and then he uses them to restrain Cyborg until he can tie him down. And then he's got all these pieces there that you see that he's going to graft onto Cyborg, and as he presumably changes out his human parts for these machine parts. And there's a whole definite body horror angle to this one. The whole idea of taking out human bits and putting in machine bits and having this forced on him, being held down, having no choice in the matter. And it really wouldn't take a whole lot to make this episode very icky. You could certainly make this much more adult than it is, but it's kind of like a taste of this body horror at an all ages level. But I could definitely see how a little kid could be kind of weirded out about this, maybe if they saw it from the same angle, I guess, that I do. So this episode is a bit of a mixed bag. Like I said before, it's not on the whole as good as Sisters was, or as a couple of the other episodes that I'm going to talk about. But I really like this body horror angle. I really like the Fixit angle, and the fact that you get a spotlight on Cyborg. And that's why I chose to include this episode as one of the ones that I wanted to talk about from the first season of Teen Titans. Nevermore is the name of the 6th episode of the first season of Teen Titans. This one opens with a battle with Dr. Light, who seems to have the upper hand until Raven turns kind of scary dangerous. She's got red glowing eyes, and she's out of control for about a minute. And she actually kind of starts to grow in size, and you see these tentacles come out of her cloak. And for a moment there, it kind of reminded me of the character cloak from Marvel Comics. But then she seems to calm down. She regains control. But Dr. Light is subdued basically by her, thanks to her her efforts at this point. But there's no real explanation at this point as to what happened. So the rest of the episode, the scene shifts then to the next day, to breakfast, and Raven is still kind of down. And then Beast Boy and Cyborg go to talk to her. And they go to her room, and Cyborg accidentally breaks the door, and so they go in, and they find this mirror. And what happens is they end up getting sucked into this mirror, and it turns out that this mirror is actually a passageway into Raven's mind. And what they find in there is what they have in there is a very trippy experience where it's kind of looks at first like they're in outer space, like they're on an asteroid, and then they're walking along these rocks, and there's these weird ravens in there, or not ravens, ravens in there, like the birds, that are really creepy looking. They don't dwell on them too much, but I found them really creepy. As they wander around inside Raven's mind, they meet different sides of her personality. Different sides that they aren't used to seeing. Her happy side, her sad side, her brave side. And then they meet her father, Trigon. And I can't remember if they actually named him or not. Of course, I know the name because I know the character from the comic books, but I don't know him all that well. I don't think I've actually read any of the stories that he, from way back in the day, that he is in. I looked him up, and his first appearance was in New Teen Titans, the original New Teen Titans series from 1980. Issues 4 through 6 was the first story he was in. And I think that Chris Ivey talked about this story on his podcast. It was it may have been on Geek Brunch Retrocast, or it was on Myth Making ETC. I think it was on Geek Brunch Retrocast that he talked about it, but I can't remember, and I didn't look up to see which episode it was. It wasn't that recently, but it may have been a few months ago that he talked about this story. But this is among the stories because I really do want to go back and read all of the original New Teen Titans run, and even some of the second New Teen Titans series from 84. So that was his first appearance in New Teen Titans 4 through 6. He also showed up. There was a mini-series called Tales of the New Teen Titans, not to be confused with the title Tales of the Teen Titans, which was what the original New Teen Titans series became. But Tales of the New Teen Titans was a 4-issue mini-series which told the origins of the 4 newish members of the Teen Titans. I believe it was Changeling, Starfire, Raven, and Cyborg, and each one had an issue devoted to their origin. And I think I've read some of those. I don't think I have any of those anymore, but I believe they've also been collected in the same collections where you can find the archive collections, or they now have paperback collections of the New Teen Titans, the 1980 series. Trigon also showed up in New Teen Titans number 31, which I think was the concluding part of a story that involved the Brotherhood of Evil, or the New Brotherhood of Evil. I think I've read the first part of that, but I've never read the second part. I'm pretty sure I don't have it, but that's issue 31. And then finally, the last big story that I could find that he played a significant role in was the first story from the 1984 series of New Teen Titans, from the first 5 issues, which in its collected form is known as the Terror of Trigon, which is a title that I've known for years, but I've never read it, and I don't think I have any of those issues, although I do have some issues from that series. And after that, there's no lengthy stories. I mean, he has some one-off appearances here and there, rather sporadic appearances here and there, and I'm not really sure from what I'm seeing if these appearances are just cameo appearances, like a memory that Raven has, or if it's an actual appearance of him in the story. Getting back to the story, so Beast Boy and Cyborg and Raven finally shows up. She comes into the mirror, travels into her mind to help to try and get Beast Boy and Cyborg out, but of course at this point they're battling Trigon. They try battling him conventionally, just using their superpowers. That doesn't seem to work. I think it was either Cyborg or Beast Boy. One of them suggests that she uses all of her other personalities, that they all team up to take on Cyborg. Now, instead of teaming up, what she does is she merges with all of them, and the Raven that appears at that point, the character Raven that appears at that point, is cloaked in white instead of this navy color, which I think is what her cloak usually is. And she takes on Trigon, and she defeats him, but I think there may be a little bit of foreshadowing here, because what happens is Trigon isn't completely destroyed. He kind of changes into another version of Raven, but he's got the 4 eyes, the 4 red glowing eyes, like Trigon usually is shown as having, because he's a giant in this, and he's usually shown as a giant. No explanation, really, as to why her father is a giant and she's so small. Maybe that was explained at some point in the comic books, but certainly not in this episode. But that part is absorbed into her, which makes sense, because if they're in her mind, it's not actually her father that they're fighting, but it's her memories of her father, or something like that, or the part of her that comes from her father. So I think that there is a callback to this in a future season. It's not in season 1. I'm positive of that. And I don't think it's even in season 2. I think it's in a later season where Trigon shows up again. And I think they may do the Terror of Trigon story. But that's basically the end of the episode. They basically, at that point, they're able to leave. Robin and Starfire had kind of played a minor role in this episode as kind of comic relief, where they were kind of staying out of it. They didn't want to go disturb Raven. They weren't sure where Beast Boy and Cyborg were, but and this was kind of Robin's insistence. Anyhow, I wasn't sure about including this episode, rewatching this episode, and talking about it on this episode of Teen Titans, and talking about it on this episode of Dave Talks Comics. But I do like it. I don't think I like it quite as much as some of the other episodes, like Sisters, or the Cyborg episode, or the next episode that I'm going to talk about. But I think it's a good episode to give you an idea of who Raven is and what her background is. And I think they do some interesting things. I think the animation's really good, and they do some interesting things with the inside of Raven's mind, those trippy kind of effects, the weird Raven birds. And it's definitely an episode worth watching. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's definitely up there. And there are definitely worse episodes in this season, and that's why I chose to include it. That's it for episode 120. Dave Talks Comics can be found at davetalkscomics.com, as well as on iTunes, Stitcher, and a few other locations. If you have comments or questions, I can be reached at davetalkscomics@gmail.com, on Twitter @DaveTalksComics, or leave a comment on my website. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening.